have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday's January 4th issue of the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And on the front page is a picture of the Capitol. Underneath says, Trump is the January 6th president. The first article was written by Carlos Lasada. The two questions we should stop asking this year. There are two questions I'm tired of hearing, and I'm certain you'll recognize them. They are posed by overworked podcasters feigning sagacity, by lazy moderators kick-starting a discussion or trying to rescue one, and by highbrow writers eager to unleash context on helpless readers. The first, how did we get here? This one often appears in the beginning of exchange of an argument, and it heralds a big picture, chin-stroking, dot-connecting answer. It's a successor to even more overtly pandemic formations. But first, some background. The question is easy to answer because you can pick almost any moment as the precursor for any other that links you to choose depend on the story you want to tell. Proximate cause proliferates. If you don't like the first ones, you find keep going. You will eventually spot one that suits your needs. How did we get to the so-called Trump era, for example? If your answer is about economic inequality and the forgotten man, then maybe start with the World Trade Organization or NAFTA or the decline of organized labor. If your answer is about race, then point to the backlash against the Obama presidency or against identity politics or the civil rights movement or maybe even against Reconstruction. If your answer is about a deteriorating political discourse, then call out Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh. If it's about that natives' takeover of the Republican Party, then quote at length from Patrick Buchanan's speech in the 1992 Republican National Convention, and so on ad infinitum. Tip, the farther back you go, the more erudite you'll sound. Well, really, this all traces back to 1066. I am not attacking historical inquiry, which remains as vital as ever, but rather the seductive reductionism of monocausal explanation, of pointing that to one thing back that brought us all to the stuff happening now. This is common habit in the publishing world, with journalists and pop historians constantly jumping out books about how one single year, usually 10 or 25 or 50 years before the book's publication, is a year that changed the country, changed the world, changed everything. Listen closely when people riff on how we got here, and you'll see that their explanations invariably depend on how they feel about here. Whatever one deems most important about today will dictate the preceding events worth highlighting. That's the dirty secret about how did we get here. It is not about dispassionately assessing the past, but about subjectively interpreting the present. The second question I wish we stop asking will not surprise you. What has surprised you the most about whatever, fill in the blank? This is the utility infielder of questions, if you can't address any topic with equal ease. What has surprised you the most about Pete Hegseth's tenure as defense secretary? What has surprised you the most about the college football playoffs? What has surprised you the most about the second season of the show, or the new album, or that special election? The trouble with this question is that it removes the focus from the substance of whatever event or debate is being discussed, redirecting to the speaker or writer personal perceptions or expectations about it, away from facts and toward idiosyncrasy. It's barely better than what was going through your mind or how do you feel? Questions in sports interviews. After an athlete makes the shot, catches a touchdown, wins the championship, the answer is, how does it feel? By the way, it's almost always that it feels surreal. So the next time some host or moderator asks how we got here, I hope the answer is another question. Where is here? What exactly have we become in this here, in this now? Once we determine that question, we can start to determine how we arrived at that condition. And if you insist on asking what surprised someone the most, then at least follow up with a more useful query. Why were you surprised? What misunderstanding lies in the heart of your surprise, and what is its source? Without those next steps, the first question is rendered useless. No matter, I am sure these questions will continue to be posed. They are too easy, too obvious, too pervasive to do away with entirely. Which leads me to one more. What does the persistence of such questions mean for us as a nation? January 6th was just the start. It was a day that should live in infamy. Instead, it was the day President's second term began to take shape. 5 years ago on January 6, 2021, a pro-Trump mob stormed the Capitol hoping to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election. After the sun set that day, Congress reconvened to certify Joe Biden's victory. The rioters lost, and so did Mr. Trump, who had summoned them to Washington and urged them to march to the Capitol. The Trump era seemed to have ended in one of the most disgraceful anti-American acts in the nation's history. The day was indeed a turning point, but not the one it first seemed to be. It was a turning point toward a version of Mr. Trump who was even more lawless than the one who governed the country in the first term. It heralded a culture of political unaccountability in which people who violently attack Congress and beat police escape without lasting consequences. The politicians and pundits who had egged on the attack with their lies escaped as well. The aftermath of January 6th made the Republican Party even more feckless, beholden to one man and willing to pervert reality to serve his interests. Once Mr. Trump won the election again in 2024, despite his role in encouraging the riot and his many distortions about it, it emboldened him to govern in defiance of the Constitution, without regard for the truth and with malice toward those who stand up to his abuses. Tragically, America is still living in a political era that began on January the 6th, 2021. Recognizing as much as necessary to bring this era to an end before it has many more anniversaries. All this would have been hard to conceive for many Americans 5 years ago. Disgust was bipartisan for a time because so many episodes of that day seemed unforgettable. As members of Congress were meeting to certify the presidential election result, more than 2,000 protesters forced their way into the Capitol, smashing windows, overturning barricades. They chanted about their desire to hang Vice President Mike Pence and track down Nancy Pelosi. Fearing their lives, elected officials, their aides, and people who happened to be visiting the Capitol scrambled to find safe hiding places. The rioters eventually broke into the Senate chamber. The victims who suffered the worst violence were police officers protecting the Capitol. Patrick McCoy, one of the rioters, pinned a Metropolitan Police officer, Daniel Hodge, with a stolen riot stick. Steve Capaccio, another attacker, used Officer Hodge's own baton to beat him, leaving him to scream through bloody teeth. David Dempsey discharged a stream of pepper spray that burned the lungs, throat, eyes, and face of Detective Fusen Nagan. Julian Cater shot pepper into the face of the Capitol Police officer, Brian Sticknick, who suffered a series of strokes hours later and died. As the deceased officer's mother, Gladys Sicknick, later said to the attackers in court, all of you bear responsibility for the injury sustained by Brian's fellow officers. The broken bones, head traumas, and continuing mental anguish they suffer and will endure for the rest of their lives. 4 other officers on duty that day died by suicide in the 7 months after the attack. Mr. Trump made possible the lawlessness. After he lost the 2020 election, he spent weeks peddling the lie that he had rightfully won. He encouraged state officials to find votes for him or simply appoint electors loyal to him. He tried to pressure Mr. Pence not to certify the result. In a final attempt to subvert democracy and overturn the election, Mr. Trumpers went to Washington on January 6th. That morning, he appeared at the Ellipse, a park near the White House, and suggested to his supporters gathered there that he would march with them to the Capitol. He said so even though he knew some of them were armed, according to House committee testimony. Fight like hell, he told the mob. After the protesters marched to Capitol Hill and forced their way into the Capitol, Mr. Trump tweeted criticism of Mr. Pence at almost the same moment that Mr. Pence had to flee to a secure location. As the violence intensified, Mr. Trump's staff implored him to intervene. He delayed sending security reinforcements to the Capitol. He sent a couple of heartfelt tweets urging his supporters to stay peaceful, but did not tell them to leave the building. Not until almost 3 hours after the attack began, Mr. Trump released a video telling the rioters to go home. It was clear that restoring peace was far from his priority. In the video, he dwelled on the false claims that the 2020 election had been stolen, which was the mob's justification for attacking the certification of votes. His video was at best a mixed message in which he signaled that the cause of the riot was just, even as he called nonviolence long after violence had started. That video would mark the high point of chagrin for the January 6th violence. At 6 p.m., less than 2 hours before releasing the video, he returned to distorting the historical record. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who had been badly and unfairly treated for so long. He posted, "Go home with love and peace. Remember this day forever." Over the next several years, January 6th became a day of love, in Mr. Trump's telling. The rioters were patriots, and those detained were hostages whose suffering compared to the Japanese Americans interned to World War II. He made common cause with the most extreme elements of his coalition to manipulate history. Together, they rallied right-wing media to their cause, silenced all but a few Republican critics, and intimidated corporate leaders into complicity. This behavior, though inexcusable, was not shocking. It fit with Mr. Trump's character as both a businessman and politician who has long pursued his self-interest without legal or ethical restraint. The shocking part of the story was the response of so many other people in government, media, and business. Initially, many denounced him as rioters stormed the Capitol. The Fox News host, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham sent texts to the White House chief of staff at the time, Mark Meadows, urging him to persuade Mr. Trump to end the attack. Amazon and other companies suspended campaign donations to Republicans who had refused to certify the 2020 election results. Facebook and Twitter banned Mr. Trump from their platform. The most important role fell to Congress. It had power to bar him from holding office again, the appropriate punishment for a political leader who encouraged and praised an attack on Congress. The House impeached him with 222 Democratic votes and 10 Republicans just 7 days after January 6th. Hard as it may be to recall now, the Senate appeared close to convicting him and barring him from office. At the Times report on January 6th, Senator Mitch McConnell, then Republican leader, has concluded that President Trump committed impeachable offenses and believes that Democrats' move to impeach him will make it easier to purge Mr. Trump from the party, according to people familiar with Mr. Connell's thinking. Within days, though, Mr. Connell surrendered his influence and his principles. He never mounted a campaign to persuade other Republicans to join him, the Times reported. He allowed Mr. Trump's supporters to dominate the debate. Convincing Mr. Trump would have required 17 Republican votes in the Senate, and 17 senators courageously voted for conviction, the most consequential unknown of January 6th. It would have happened if Mr. McConnell had shown similar courage. He may well have found the 10 extra votes needed to change American history. In the end, he did not even vote for conviction himself. It will be the defining stain on Mr. McConnell's legacy. He may realize it, too. In the past year, he has turned into a rare Republican senator willing to defy Mr. Trump on some major policies. After the Senate voted against conviction, there were no similarly clean paths toward accountability. The House January 6th committee did admirable work reconstructing the day and Mr. Trump's role in 2022. That work appears to have had a political impact. In the midterm election, Mr. Trump's allies and defenders faced 5 percentage points worse on average than other Republicans. In swing states, prominent 2020 election deniers lost their races. Still, dissatisfaction with Bill Biden administration handed Republicans control of the House, and they abandoned any January 6 accountability once they were in charge. Instead, they began investigating their colleagues who had attempted to bring justice to Mr. Trump. The legal system took some steps to fill the accountability gap, but it moved slowly and effectively. Justice Department officials, led by Attorney General Merrick Garland, agonized over whether to prosecute a former president from the other party. In the end, they did, but their case produced arguably the worst of all results. It happened too slowly for a trial to take place before Mr. Trump ran for president again in 2024, and thus potentially to influence public perceptions at the House January hearing did 2 years earlier. Yet the existence of the case allowed Mr. Trump to cast himself as the victim of political prosecution. Strongest state case in Georgia was even more flawed. Prosecutors, led by Fannie Wills, the district attorney of Fulton County, charged Mr. Trump and 18 others with a racketeering conspiracy for their efforts to overturn Georgia's 2020 election. Those prosecutors also moved slowly. Worse, Ms. Wills undermined the case by engaging in a secret, deeply irresponsible romantic relationship with a prosecutor who reported to her. Even without these issues, the criminal justice system would always have been a less effective means than Congress for holding Mr. Trump accountable. Only Congress could have definitively ended his political career. A convicted person can still run for federal office. With the political and legal systems failing to punish him, much of the rest of the country started to move on. Business leaders made excuses for him. The conservative media establishment promoted him again and cheered on the purge of Republicans who had criticized his role on January 6. Many voters, too, forgave, or at least proved willing to overlook those crimes. It decided that a second Trump president was preferable to Mr. Biden or Kamala Harris' leadership. Some 77 million Americans voted for Mr. Trump in 2024. Once he was elected, his post-January 6 experience inspired his administrative goals and methods. He and his aides concluded that intimidation and lawlessness could yield victories, even in seemingly unwinnable and sometimes illegal circumstances. They used January 6 as a litmus test to identify and promote loyalists. They asked productive national security officials whether the Capitol assault was an inside job. Washington Post reported the administration gave senior jobs to extremists, opportunists, and conspiracy theorists. Kash Patel, Mr. Trump's current FBI director, promoted the theory that the FBI had secretly encouraged January 6 violence. Mr. Patel and other administration officials retaliated against prosecutors and FBI agents who insisted on enforcing the law impartially. Many noble people have been fired or demoted. Some face unjust federal investigation. On the first day of his second term, Mr. Trump granted clemency to all of the nearly 1,600 people charged or convicted in connection with January 6th. The group included hundreds of defendants found to have assaulted law enforcement. It included Stuart Roberts and Enrico Tarra, who helped organize the attack. The pardons came 8 days after J.D. Vance, preparing to take office as vice president, said, "If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. The president has also pardoned supporters like Rudolph Giuliani, who tried to overturn the 2020 election results with fraudulent electors." The pardons issue a message. If you break the law to protect me, you will be supported. And if you uphold the law to restrain me, you will be persecuted. Today, Ed Martin, who helped raise money for January 6 defendants, holds a top Justice Department effectively dedicated to hounding Mr. Trump's perceived enemies. Mr. Martin and his work group are investigating prosecutors, FBI agents, and members of Congress whose jobs obligated them to investigate January 6. The thuggishness extends far beyond the people who were directly involved in January 6. The legacy of that day has taught Mr. Trump how to use power more aggressively to advance his interest in his second term. He has surrounded himself with officials who accede to his lawless demands. One example, Bill Pugh, who runs the Federal Housing Finance, has accused outspoken Democratic lawmakers of mortgage fraud and gone after Lisa Cook, Federal Reserve Governor, whose views on monetary policy Mr. Trump does not like. Mr. Trump has also learned that congressional Republicans will bow to him even when he treats them with contempt, ignores the Constitution. He has defied the War Powers Act by blowing up boats in the international water, set high tariff rates without consulting Congress, and nominated preposterous candidates for the Senate to confirm. He has forced the retirement of legislators who buck him. He has suggested the House of Representatives has little independent power. "I'm the Speaker and the President," he recently joked. In private, legislators acknowledge that they obey him partly because they fear violence from his supporters. Mr. Trump likely plays courts more successfully than in his first term. The Supreme Court has helped him. First, by ruling in 2024, the president has almost complete immunity from further prosecution. As a result, he knows that he faces little legal jeopardy for his most outrageous actions. The justices have also proved unwilling to halt some of Mr. Trump's most dubious second-term policies, such as tariffs and use of ethnic profiling on immigration raids. Excuse me. The justices have instead allowed most policies to proceed while cases gradually wind through the courts. Much as Iran Much as he ran out the clock on his post-January 6 prosecution, he's reshaped his post-January 6 trading relationships, immigration policy, and other areas before legal system has roused him to intervene. Again and again, Mr. Trump dares the system to stop him. He does so knowing that the same system that failed to hold him to account January 6th is likely to do it now. The effects might outlast him. He has shown his Republicans would-be successors, starting with Vance, that they can rewrite fallible history, encourage federal crimes for political ends by pardoning guilty people, exact revenge to those who do their duty to uphold the law, and manipulating a hand-sweeping, unprecedented powers to a president. In Mr. Trump's second term, he has governed as if January 6th never ended. The damage to the nation is severe. As dark as this story has become, it is not over. The next chapter will depend on what Americans do now, especially those who share some of Mr. Trump's policy preference but remain loyal to American democracy. Many people have already responded heroically to January 6. Police officers risked their lives and suffered beatings to defend the Capitol. Hundreds of FBI agents, prosecutors, congressional aides, and others investigated the day's events and created a historical record that Mr. Trump cannot erase. A small number of elected Republicans, including Liz Cheney, Anthony Gonzalez, Jamie Hara Butler, Adam Kinzinger, Peter Meijer, and Mitt Romney, insisted on defending the Constitution at the cost of their careers. The past few months offer some new reasons for hope. Mr. Hope's approval ratings have fallen. His party had lost the election. Lower court judges, including some appointed by Mr. Trump, have blocked some of his policies and call out his brazen disregard for truth. Even some congressional Republicans have voted against him on the few matters like the Jeffrey Epstein files and health care subsidies. These developments made it possible to imagine a better future. The January 6th era turns 5 years old on Tuesday. The anniversary will always be a mournful one for America. The nation's challenge now is to ensure the day is ultimately viewed as it initially was, as an aberration. Americans must summon the collective will to bring this era to an end and make certain that the violence, lawlessness, and injustice of January 6th do not endure. I would think objectively, regardless, editorial comment, regardless of political likes or dislikes, January 6th was just awful. You can be upset with policies, but you have to do it peacefully. You don't attack the Capitol. Indeed, that was a very sad day. There's a cure for attraction to narcissistic leaders. In myth, the man who falls in love with himself dies. In America, he gets the corner office. In ancient Greek mythology, a man who falls in love with his own reflection withers away and dies. In modern America, he gets promoted to the corner office, and sometimes even to the Oval Office. We should know better. Great leaders put their missions above their egos. Narcissists do the opposite. They see themselves as special and superior and put their egos above all else. So why do we keep falling for them? A study of U.S. presidents' elections from 1824 to 1992 revealed that the taller candidate consistently got more votes than the shorter candidate, and that height was a stronger predictor in times of social, economic, and political threat. The greater the societal instability, the more people wanted a kinder, who projected physical dominance and strength. That's the allure of a narcissist today. We live in a period of extraordinary unrest. Millions of people died in a pandemic, and for the first time in generations, hundreds of thousands of people have died in a land war in Europe. Climate change is a threat to our way of life. Artificial intelligence is a looming threat to our livelihoods. The result for many people in an overwhelming sense of uncertainty and anxiety. And those are fertile conditions for authoritarians who promise to restore order to chaos, and for narcissists who exude intoxicating levels of confidence and charisma. Readers of a certain stripe will assume this is an article about President Trump. He is, after all, the man who has boasted, "I alone can fix it, and I know more about ISIS than the generals do," who exaggerated his wealth, refused to concede that he lost an election, described the brutal killing of a Hollywood couple as being somehow all above him. But my point is not about Mr. Trump per se. It's about why people are attracted to him and so many others like him as leaders in politics and business right now. A little grandiosity can be conducive to big, disruptive ideas, but the evidence is abundant that people with high levels of narcissism for worse leaders, to advance their own interest, they're more willing to manipulate others, cut corners, even break laws. Stakes are especially high in politics. In one study, 120 experts rated the American presidents on their narcissism. The top three, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Andrew Jackson, all saw their legacy tarnished by corruption and disastrous decisions. Hubris and Jackson made to defy the Supreme Court and forcibly remove Native Americans from their land, led Johnson to escalate the Vietnam War despite warnings from his Undersecretary of State, and led Nixon to the Watergate scandal. In business, too, narcissistic leaders wreak havoc. Banks led by people rated as narcissistic establish riskier policies and recover more slowly from the 2008 financial crisis. Instead of adjusting their decisions based on objective success or failure, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the word, narcissistic. Executives get high on social praise, which emboldens them to take even bigger risks. As they bask in the glow of yes men and flattery, they're more likely to double down on their ideas that aren't working. Steve Jobs' arrogance led him to release the overpriced Apple Lisa, burn bridges with his board, and get forced out of his own company. You can even see the cost of narcissism in professional sports. In the NBA, the more narcissistic players' tweets were, the less their teams improved during the season. Narcissists are ball hogs and glory hounds. They take credit, assign blame, put themselves above the group. They see leadership as an opportunity to seize, not an responsibility to serve. Narcissists. A popular take that they were being bamboozled by these people, were seduced by superficial charms and fall to see the hubris that power it. Yet research shows that narcissists are not hard to spot. They boast about themselves, post flattering photos of themselves, sign their names with oversized letters. They feel entitled to special treatment. And when they don't get it, they signal virtuous victimhood, airing the grievance as if it were festivus. Across multiple studies, people who were well aware of narcissists' self-serving tendencies still preferred them as leaders, for an unpredictable word. Psychologists found that narcissistic leaders are more appealing to people with low self-esteem. The lower our opinion of ourselves, the more insecure we're feeling, the higher our options are narcissists. Supporting them makes us feel special and makes them feel less threatened. It begins early. One study of elementary and middle schoolers found that 96% of classrooms, kids who displayed narcissistic qualities were more likely to be nominated for leadership roles. If you're stuck with a narcissistic boss, it's possible to temper their worst impulses. The key to complement them are qualities that are clearly separate from any realms in which you need to deliver criticism. Before you question their decisions, praise their creativity, their golf handicap, their jokes. Narcissists are less aggressive when their egos are stroked. Wise leaders balance confidence with humility. They're secure enough in their strength to acknowledge their weakness and learn from their critics, whereas narcissists covet leadership roles. Humble leaders are often reluctant to resume the mantle. It may be a coincidence that George Washington had to be coaxed and cajoled becoming the first U.S. president, and that he refused a third term. One way to get more humble leaders into power is to change the default. Instead of expecting people to elbow their way into leadership, we should consider all who are qualified unless they opt out. There's evidence that this simple rift is enough to reduce the gender gap in promotions, which will have the additional benefit of lowering the number of narcissists in high positions, since women are less likely to be narcissists and psychopaths and more likely to prioritize the collective good. An editorial comment. There may be some merit to that comment. Maybe we should have more women leaders. Countries with more female legislators are less likely to go to war, and peace agreements involving women are 35% more likely to last at 15 years in the early stages of the pandemic. Countries in U.S. states led by women had lower COVID-19 fertility rates, in part because they did a better job showing both confidence in their plans and empathy to people's pain. And organized psychologists have found that when male leaders are stressed, they're more likely to be hostile and abusive. Tell me again that women are too emotional to lead. It could also help to recruit people who emerge from humble beginnings. On average, people who grow up poor tend to be more effective leaders and are less likely to cheat because they're less prone to narcissism and entitlement. The same is true of people who start their career in a recession. A history of struggles build compassion. Of course, group averages are poor proxies for individual traits. Ultimately, the best way to stop narcissists from rising in elected office is to address the threats, and they are making people anxious. Greater job security and income stability should have voters less tempted to brash candidates. In the corporate world, we promote better leaders when we stop focusing on their individual results, along with their start weighing their contributions to others. The responsibility of leadership is too important to entrust to arrogant people. Narcissistic leaders deny their weakness and make themselves weaker. Humble leaders admit their weakness and make themselves stronger. Great leaders overcome their weakness and make us all better. Editorial comment, those an interesting article, but the reality in today, the narcissists are winning. Mondami understands that politics is an art. The mayor's resume is like a composite picture of 21st century urban America. Whether Mayor Zohan Mamdani has the skills and good fortune to succeed in the so-called second hardest job in America, no one can yet say. But at age 34, he's already a historic figure, beginning with his biography. Born in Uganda to Indian parents and raised in the rarefied atmosphere of Columbia University, where his father is a prominent professor, he identifies as Muslim, was a state assemblyman from Queens, a member of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Socialist America, and is married to an animator and illustrator, Rama Dua, whose work has appeared in the New Yorker. Editorial comment, that is quite a background, isn't it? His resume looks like a composite picture of urban America in the 21st century and of the broad coalition Mr. Mamdani built when he swept victory in November. His strong showing across the city among most racial and ethnic groups and most income levels, the Times reported included impressive performance in precincts where the median register rate was 45 or younger. It was an electoral map that overlaps with President Trump's winning coalition in 2024. Indeed, all of these statistics being processed and fussed over in post-mortems of Mr. Mamdani's victory, the most telling may be the number of Mamdani voters who previously supported Mr. Trump. Some 60,000 according to data tabulated by CBS News. The parallels with Mr. Trump's victory were not lost on the president's ally, Steve Bannon. Modern politics now is about engaging low propensity voters. It told Political in a review Mr. Mamdani's ability to attract them. Mr. Bannon said, means Mr. Mamdani is a serious guy whose victory points to something now on the left. This is kind of the Trump model. The model begins with an understanding that positions that only recently seemed extreme or fringe have gained wider acceptance in a recent book, Lost in Ideology. The political philosopher Jason Blakely wrote of liquid ideologies that spill across the boundaries of left and right and sometimes can combine in unexpected ways. One striking example is the growing consensus of opposition to Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. Many in both parties were unprepared for this, given the long-standing bipartisan support for Israel. But just as anti-war protests during the Vietnam era gave rise to the emerging generation of politicians, left and right, who began to question the Cold War campaign against world communism, so has campus-based activism, such as the kind Mr. Mamdani took part in at Bowdoin, challenge America's long-standing commitments in the Middle East. The break with the past could not be sharper, especially in New York with its large Jewish population, which is a dominant constituency in the city's politics. For many years, New York mayors were expected to assert their solidarity with Israel, and mostly did until Mr. Mamdani, who was overtly critical of Israel's actions. In analysis published in the Free Press, the scholar Zainab Rubaugh argued that Mr. Mamdani is the vanguard of a new political cohort on the left that has adopted the lexicon of third world liberalism to American politics, transforming decolonization into a scaffold for moral and political identity. Mr. Mamdani's position on Israel led to a strong backlash, in particular when he declined for months to disavow the slogan, globalize the Intifada, which may say amounts to a call for violence against Jews around the world. He later said that he would not use such language. The surprise for startled observers of Mr. Mamdani's large victory is how many New Yorkers agreed with his stance on Israel, or at least seemed untroubled by it. The Gaza debate is one component of a larger lesson of the Trump years that still eludes many observers and commentators who tend to assess voters on specific policy matters rather than looking more closely as to how voters think. In an essay in the latest issue of Harper's, Mr. Blakely argued that ideologies are holistic phenomena, large-scale narratives that may not only guide action, but are embodied in many of our social rituals and ways of organizing. Mr. Mamdani's campaign was a masterclass in 21st century organizing. There was his witty YouTube videos in which he quizzed street vendors about permit costs, showing viewers how these costs are passed to consumers. His visits to mosques and synagogues, a nighttime rally in Forest Hills Stadium, in which he invited the audience members to turn on their cell phone flashlights if they knocked on doors to get out the vote, to show how useful old-style campaigning still is. And there was a moment in his victory speech when he burst through the fourth wall and taunted his anticipated chief antagonist, Donald Trump. Since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up. In saying this, Mr. Mamdani was telling the president to listen up, but he was also giving courage to his supporters. With his victory, he wanted his Muslim constituents to know that they belong, not just in the 5 boroughs of the city, but in the halls of power. Mr. Mamdani made no effort to conceal his ideological allegiance during the campaign. At the rally in Forest Hill, with early voting underway, he was joined on stage by 2 of his mentors, Senator Bernie Sanders and Republican Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, leading progressive votes. At his inauguration on Thursday, Ms. Ocasio introduced Mr. Mamdani, and Mr. Sanders administered the ceremonial oath of office. The partnership of these 3 politicians led some suggest that Mr. Mamdani is strictly a local or regional phenomenon. The promise of universal child care, freezes on rent, and fast fare-free buses may sound radical outside New York, but the proposals matter less than the spirit in which they are made and the sentiments they rest on. Or as Mr. Blakely remarked in his book, we have forgotten that politics is cultural. Mr. Mamdani understood this very well. His biography on the State Assembly website mentioned his detours in film, rap, and writing in addition to his career as an organizer. To make sense of the rise, we do well to set aside data-tested political science and look instead to the lessons of art. One useful primer is the novel Netherland by Joseph O'Neill's bittersweet ode to New York in the aftermath of September 11th. Mr. O'Neill, like Mr. Mamdani, is a cosmopolitan New Yorker who seems hand to for our century. His background is Irish and Turkish, and he grew up in the Netherlands. He practiced law in England before moving to New York and becoming a leading fiction writer. The book is mainly set in New York, with much of the action taking place in remote working-class districts outside Manhattan. The narrator, a displaced Dutchman and avid cricket player, travels the city to compete on fields like Walker Park's on Staten Island, whose cricket matches have been played since 1872. His teammates come from South Asia and the Caribbean. The team's main booster, a Trinidadian, insists that cricket is the first modern team sport in America and a bona fide American pastime. At almost the same time Netherland was published, Mr. Mamdani, then a student at the Bronx High School of Science, who had grown up with game in Uganda, had the idea with a friend to form a school cricket team. Any and all were welcome. Brown ain't no requirement to play this game, the teenage Mr. Mamdani posted on Facebook. Words that might easily have found their way into the battering exchange in Netherlands. That early organized effort was cited by Mr. Mamdani's biography, and the State Assembly welcomed. It taught him how coming together with a few like-minded individuals can transform rhetoric into reality. Some wonder how Mr. Mamdani was able to overcome the distrust so many voters who disagree with him on the Middle East and other divisive issues that bring together. There too, Netherlands offers a clue. The world opened up by its new cricket connection, able the narrow to meet all sorts of strictly local characters, lawyers, realtors, painters, roofers, fishermen, rabbit secretaries, rabbis, not rabbits, rabbis and secretaries. This looks like Mr. Mamdani's New York, down to the rabbis who might not have endorsed him but supported him. All these characters are drawn to a larger idea or hope of what New York and America may one day become. At one point, the narrator of Netherlands attends an annual gala of cricket clubs in the region. I made my entry just in time to hear a voice announce, "Please stand for the national anthem," and every person stood up for a rosy recording of the Star-Spangled Banner. Not anthem, but hymn. Patriotism joined with higher belief. Here, then, is a deeper meaning for Mayor Mamdani's election. As a moment when so many seem to have lost faith in the American future and speak nostalgia of making the country great again, newcomers, immigrants, including New York City's new mayor, continue to embrace the American dream. The opiate crisis never ended. It started when I got injured in a football game. It started when I was trying to move a bookcase in a house. I was cleaning, it fell over and broke 3 bones in my hand. It started after my hernia operation. These are some of the stories I heard when I sat down in the early 2020s with people from Appalachia who were recovering in addiction with hope of recovery still ahead. I wanted to write a novel about the epidemic of opioid use disorder that was tearing apart the place and people I love. My first job was to listen. How this happened to working people, mothers, high school athletes, none of whom imagined the hell at the bottom of their first bottle of painkillers. Some started as kids, messing around with the stuff that showed up wherever they turned. Others were following a doctor's orders. Some didn't understand they were addicted. They only knew they needed a renewed prescription after the first ran out, because they felt sicker now than they have ever felt in their lives. As a member of the first war on drugs generation, I was taught things about addiction that I spent years unlearning. The government's long campaign of selective incarceration and punitive propaganda sent officers in the high school to tell us that bad people brought addiction to themselves when they didn't have the gumption to just say no. I'm shocked at how the cruelty of attributing illness to moral failure. Imagine telling children that pneumonia comes from weak willpower, or that a family member should be kicked out of their house for having cancer. Addiction alters the brain and body disastrously, even fatally. Sick if the substance is withdrawn. It's a condition nobody has ever asked for. Like any other disease, it can be treated medically, and also importantly with compassion. Where sympathy is withheld, resources for care do not flow. Most of us know how this plague arrived in Appalachia. A pharmaceutical company studied the metrics and pointed to my corner of the map as a gold mine, where work injuries are common and medical care is stretched far too thin, where centuries of extractive industries have taken out timber and coal and left behind broken infrastructures. And folks of limited means, these companies found out more lucrative things to harvest are paying. Most of us know about the lawsuits against Big Pharma that forced changes in how painkillers are marketed and prescribed. Please do not think this means justice has been served. If you come to visit me, I could walk you down our country roads and point out all the houses where grandparents are raising little ones whose parents are incarcerated, sick, or dead of addiction. The road to recovery here will be longer than my lifetime. Of all the stories I heard when I sat down to listen, the hardest to bear was this one. First of all, the author, this was introduced by Barbara Kingslover, Mrs. Kingslover, and she's based in Nashville, Tennessee. This is the article. Over the past year, Times Opinion has been visiting the Appalachian town of Clarksburg, Virginia, and talking to local pediatrician Brian Bolasino about the enduring crisis in his hometown. Opiate abuse has devastated many of the people he grew up with. Now his practice is filled with their children and grandchildren. In West Virginia, between 2020 and 2022, nearly 1 in 8 babies was born exposed to drugs. Clarksburg used to be a great place to grow up. In the last 40 years, storefronts has empty. Drug use has invited crime in. I'm not sure people realize how families become victims of this and that. Kids are suffering. Drug changes the sound of baby cries. It's a cry that you very quickly learn to cry in pain. Many of the babies showing signs of withdrawal will be taken from their drug-addicted parents. These children grow up with much higher rates of behavioral problems. Another article, the cultural clash that could define the future of TV. Netflix beat HBO, now it should become HBO. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from Sunday, January 4th issue of the New York Times Opinion Section. We read from the New York Times Opinion Section every Sunday at 2 p.m. Your reader's been Dick Shanley, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,